Welcome to Santa Barbara Historical Museum. I'm Daisha Harwood, and on behalf of our board and our president, welcome. Hattie Beresford writes a wonderful and popular local history column for the Montecito Journal. It's called The Way It Was. She recently authored Celebrating CAMA's Centennial, the 100-year history of the Community Arts Association. And her book, The Way It Was, Santa Barbara 100 Years Ago, is apparently nearly sold out. We have a few copies in the museum store if you're interested. She is also the author of the museum's publication, The Play is the Thing, and of course the editor and author of My Santa Barbara Scrapbook by Elizabeth Eaton Burton. Ladies and gentlemen, someone who is so incredibly wonderful and good to us at the Historical Museum, Hattie Beresford.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome. This is one of my favorite places to be. I'm here so often, people think I work here. But they're not paying me anything, so I guess I don't. Anyways, it's a wonderful day today to be able to share with you the latest noticias and how that all came about and how it all connects to a lot of things here in Santa Barbara. Okay, today's talk is about the exciting history behind the Community Arts Association, which was directly responsible for establishing today's CAMA, the Community Arts Music Association, the Lobero Theatre, and Fiesta, as well as having inspired probably many, many different arts groups in town. The critical point of its development begins with World War I. This picture is a photo of the troops departing in 1917 from the Santa Barbara train station. At this time, the community learned to work together for the war effort, and later, when the boys returned, they experienced the global pandemic erroneously called the Spanish flu. Americans at that time, by the way, argued about mask mandates and school closures, just like today. The more things change, the more they stay the same. When it was finally over, the Chamber of Commerce and the City Fathers decided that they needed to have a very special 4th of July celebration, one that included 3 parades, one of which was a parade to commemorate Santa Barbara's romantic Spanish past. The other was a parade to commemorate Santa Barbara's history, starting with the Shumash. And the last was a parade for the soldiers, the returning soldiers, as well as the soldiers from all wars prior to that. Many of the pioneer American and Spanish citizens worked with the Chamber to provide the details for each of these parades and to organize them. And some of those people you are seeing here, and if I can make the cursor work. Okay, in the upper right is Catherine Den Bell. Now, Catherine Den Bell wrote a book called Swinging the Censer about her family's experiences in Santa Barbara during the Mexican days. She was an Ortega and related to the Den family, who was an early pioneer family during the Mexican days as well. She also wrote newspaper articles, and a lot of the information for how to do this and what to do came from her. This other man here that you see is Charles Frederick Eaton. He came to Santa Barbara in 1887. He was an artist, he was a landscape architect, and he was an arts and crafts artisan. He came up with the idea in the 1890s of having a floral festival to highlight Santa Barbara's horticultural riches. It included a floral parade and a battle of the flowers. This lasted for about 6 years. Santa Barbara hoped this would be their annual event. It eventually was too expensive, and they canceled it. This man is Alexander Harmer. He is an artist, and he married into one of the Santa Barbara pioneer Spanish families. And at that point, he made his life's work painting the stories that he was told about life in the past. And this is one of his paintings. It is the Fiesta at Casa de la Guerra, which, by the way, has just recently reopened. On the day of the parade, the Spanish parade began with the landing of Vizcaino on Santa Barbara's shore. The photo that you're seeing, though, is a photo actually from 1924 when Cabrillo had joined him. Unfortunately, neither man had ever set foot on Santa Barbara's land. Oh well. However, their influence is obviously much felt. This is the only photo that I've been able to find of the 1919 Spanish parade. It was down on what we call today Cabrillo Boulevard, and it had everything that you would ever imagine. They created a Spanish village down on Cabrillo Boulevard. They had horsemen on silver-studded saddles. Everyone was in costume. There were Spanish games, there was Spanish food, there was Spanish dancing, song, and music. It was incredibly successful. The second parade was successful as well. So successful that the city fathers got together and said, hey, here's an idea for another annual festival. This time we will have one that will rival Mardi Gras, and it will rival the Festival of Roses in Pasadena and bring thousands of people to town so they will buy things in Santa Barbara. So they called it La Primavera. They were going to hold it every April in the springtime. In the meantime, other people in town had been inspired by the success and pageantry of the 1919 parades to continue to bring this kind of thing to town by having Arthur Farwell come to town to build a community chorus. This woman is Marion Craig Wentworth. She was a poet, a suffragist, a playwright, and a socialist. And people gathered behind her to pay for this man, Arthur Farwell, to come to town. Farwell was one of the founders of the National Community Chorus Program. And this down here is a photograph that you see of Farwell in Ojai leading the community chorus from Santa Barbara in a concert. The Community Chorus Program, and here's Farwell, here's Barnhart, Harry Barnhart, was founded in 1913 in Rochester, New York. The founders believed that community song had the power to weld the American people into a unified social, artistic, and spiritual unity. And they traveled throughout the country setting up community choruses. At the meeting in Santa Barbara, Farwell said that song was the foundation and inspiration for all other forms of music and would benefit Santa Barbara by allowing them to have many entertainments and pageants and build a love of the arts. Oh, this picture. This is probably the biggest concert by a community chorus. It happened in the 1910s, 18, I believe, in Central Park in New York City. There were 3,000 members to this particular chorus. And you can see they still have the Gibson Girl hairdos. This is Harry Barnhart conducting, and what's interesting, if you can see it up there in the background, people are witnessing it from boats in the lake. Can you see that right there? Yeah. In Santa Barbara, the community decided, yes, they wanted to have a community chorus. They met at the recreation center, and the first 100 people to sign up, and then the next week there were 200 people, and the next week there were 300 people. Their concerts became very popular, and by Christmas in 1919, they were ready for a Christmas concert at Plaza del Mar. The bandstand still exists today. It is also over 100 years old. This is the bandstand right here that was designed by Windsor Sewell, a very well-known local architect. They brought in a 30-piece band from Los Angeles. The chorus by now is 500 strong, and there were 3,000 people in attendance. This is a community whose total population in 1920 was 20,000 people. Today, the Santa Barbara School District alone has over 13,000 people enrolled in the school system. So you can see what an incredible feat this must have been to bring all of these people together. What you're seeing in the background here is the Edison plant that stood on the corner of Mason and Castillo Street. And the other thing you might be able to see here, and all these little white things that you're seeing, those are song sheets. The community chorus didn't just sing for the people, they led the people in song. And so there were song sheets that were passed out at every single one of their concerts. And one more view, this is the audience extending all the way back to Castillo Street. In the background, you see the old Potter Hotel, which by 1919 was, I believe, the Belvedere. As spring approached in 1920, the Primavera organization had incorporated, and if you were to be able to see or recognize any of the names on this list, they're mostly Santa Barbara's businessmen. One of them was particularly responsible for the first La Primavera, and that was Hobart Chatfield Taylor, who you see here with his wife Estelle in the 1940s in Fiesta garb at El Paseo. He brought Wallace Rice to Santa Barbara. This is Wallace Rice. And Wallace Rice wrote the pageant. He was a well-known author at the time. He had written pageants for other states and organizations, and he conferred with Hobart Chatfield Taylor. He conferred with a man named Victor Mapes, who was a sometime local playwright and author. And they taught him the history of Santa Barbara, and he came up with Primavera, the Mask of Santa Barbara, which you can go to the Santa Barbara Historical Museum's Gled Hill Library, and you can read it there. One of the goals of the Primavera organization was to save and perpetuate and promote the songs of the old Spanish days in Santa Barbara. There'd been a start made of that with William J. McCoy, who was a band leader. He had collected some songs and called them Canciones de País de California, and the person who illustrated those was Alexander Harmer. And here you see Charles Lummis, who was a real preservationist of Santa Barbara, not Santa Barbara, but California culture. And Arthur Farwell in 1923 published a booklet of songs called Spanish Songs of Old California. And the person who illustrated that was Ed Breen. And we have the Ed Breen Gallery here in the Santa Barbara Historical Museum. And in the center, you see Ed Breen, whose first studio was actually at the Harmer Studios, which were on De La Guerra Plaza in an old adobe, with two of Harmer's daughters, dressed in costume. Well, those costumes, and this photograph was taken by Charles Lummis, and Alexander Harmer used these kinds of photographs to paint the scenes that he painted. Lummis, by the way, in 1903, between 1903 and 1905, had gone out throughout the Los Angeles area and found people to sing the old songs for him, and he recorded them on wax cylinders, which are very fragile. And you can, if you get on the Gene Autry or the Autry Museum website, you can find some of that, and it's really fascinating. Anyways, he had Arthur Farwell turn this into a musical score, everything that he had done, and they worked together and they knew each other. Okay. So the question became, where in the world was Primavera staged? Well, let's see, here we are. This is the Santa Barbara Historical Museum. Can you see my little red dot moving? You just walk on up the block past all that horrible construction, and then in the next block between Garden and Laguna and De La Guerra and Canon Perdido, block 171 is where Primavera was staged. And today this is Laguna Cottages for seniors. And I had trouble because I had read various websites saying it was here, and other websites said it was here. So I really went back in and I really researched it, and for sure it was in 171. And this is block 171 back in the 1880s, and you see the Gonzales Ramirez adobe right here. And somewhere in here, the stage was built to house La Primavera. And I really wanted to know exactly where. So I called on my friend Thomas Van Stein, and I sent him a picture of the stage, which I had gotten from Rochester, New York. And he said, oh yeah, I know where it is. So here's Thomas, and he's showing me where it is. It was right in this area of the Laguna Cottages for seniors today. And thank you, Thomas. We now know for a fact exactly where Primavera was held. The play had been written, and the actors and the dancers and singers had been recruited for La Primavera, but it became very clear that they needed assistance in producing it. So they hired Samuel Hume, who was working with the Greek theater at Berkeley at the time, and he had this to say about his time there. He says, in the spring of 1920, I accepted an invitation from Santa Barbara to produce a pageant in masque called Primavera, written by Wallace Rice and designed for no other purpose than to celebrate the beauty of Santa Barbara. Well, he was a little naive if he thought that, because it was being put on by businessmen. Anyways, the whole thing, he says, the whole thing was a terrific mess when I arrived, and I realized that I must have help. So he hired this man, Irving Pischel, who came to Santa Barbara immediately and helped Sam Hume get everybody organized. He worked really well with this. There were like 300 people in this production. And what you also see, the other person they hired was Arthur Farwell, who was already in town, and they wanted him to be the musical director for the production. And they had recruited a chorus of 100 voices. This also came from the University of Rochester. Songs for Primavera. We had never seen this before. Nobody's ever seen some of these pictures before because they were all hidden away in the archives in Rochester. And these are Farwell's notes and the words to the songs that were actually sung at that time. Okay, so the play begins with... Yes, This is, again, from Rochester, New York. They were so kind to let us use these. The play begins with the primeval environment of Santa Barbara as personified by Primavera, and that was Mary Shower. And surprise, she was the daughter of the Chamber of Commerce president. Okay, yeah, nothing changes. Anyway, so, sorry. Anyway, so here are the months. And all the months are in springtime dress, so they must be all the months of spring, even though there are 12 of them. But then, of course, in Santa Barbara, it's spring all the time. There was lots of song and dance and music in the play. The months are dancing on stage in this particular image. And the chorus, which you can see right here, is a hedge. And the chorus is sitting screened from the audience by this particular hedge. And I'm not sure where, there was music too, instrumental music, but I don't know where they were. So there were 3 acts. This is Act 1, when the explorers are coming to Santa Barbara, And they are, and as are the missionaries who are there to convert the Indians, of course, to Christianity. This is the same scene, but now you get a sense of it a little bit better because it's from further back, and you can see the mountains, the Riviera, and sort of the whole orientation of it. Again, the monks posing. Lovely. Two of Harmer's daughters were in this production, and I love their little aprons, and you can really get a sense of what these costumes look like in this particular one. And different flowers, again, because of course flowers bloom all year round in Santa Barbara. Okay, there were two performances, one during the daytime and one at night. So this is from the nighttime performance. And for that, an elaborate lighting system had been created. And this scene shows the missionaries, which were played by the students of St. Anthony's Seminary, and the Indians here, played by the students at Santa Barbara High School. And the missionaries are casting out the Indians' pagan idol. Now, I don't know if the Chumash people ever had pagan idols, but I figure if you're going to go bad PC, politically incorrect, you might as well do it big, and they sure did. But that idol came back as a duende, and a duende was an evil trickster who caused strife throughout the years. And it was he, I should say, excuse me, I did teach English. It was he who caused those boys to steal the cannon. So we get Canon Perdido Street. And we get 500 Street for the 500 pesos that the populace had to pay for that offense. It was a tremendous success. Everybody loved it. They wanted another one the following year. There were all sorts of optimistic articles in the press, except for the Primavera organization realized they were $10,000 in arrears, and their guarantors would have to pay up. They stuck around for a while, but they, as an organization, but they never really got back to having these really spectacular pageants to draw all those thousands of people they wanted to draw to Santa Barbara. One of the many positive consequences, however, of Primavera was this desire on the part of the people of Santa Barbara for artistic training. So a meeting was held at the library and to discuss a possible school in which all forms of art needed to create these kinds of entertainments would be taught. And so it came to be that the Santa Barbara School of the Arts was created. It was held first in the Dominguez Adobe on the corner of Carrillo and Santa Barbara Streets, and it taught everything. It had an eclectic offerings. It taught music, it taught instrumental music, it taught chorus, it taught drama, art, sculpture, painting, still life, dance, everything that you could possibly want. And they basically asked the people, what do you want to be taught? And then they tried to accommodate that. Many of the people gave of their time freely. Others, it was very small amount. It was not so much money that not anyone was going to be turned away from participating in this initially. Another positive consequence of Primavera is that an organization formed that was much more interested in providing opportunities for Santa Barbara's to play than to make money for the town's merchants and businesses. The idea of the importance of play in people's lives had arisen during the Progressive era and was already being played out in Santa Barbara through Neighborhood House and Recreation Center under the direction of Margaret Baylor. And when this organization, the Community Arts Organization, because that's what they called themselves, although they were not official yet, when they did become official, this is what they had to say. Oh, I'm never going to be able to read this. This is what they had to say about their rationale, why they should get a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to continue with the Community Arts Foundation. And this is what they said: "Our children and youth need all that goes with play if we would make them strong and alert, further national growth, keep them out of mischief, and prevent the growth of that mass of twisted, morbid, troublesome, misanthropic men and women who so grievously burden society." Lofty goals indeed. Okay. Anyway, so they decided that they'd bring Samuel Hume back to Santa Barbara, even though he thought Wallace Rice's play had been god-awful, and to produce a play that was then going to be called The Quest. And he had produced that play 4 years earlier in Michigan. So I went to Michigan. I mean, I didn't. Sidney Coe Howard, whom you see, he's in the oval. You can see that. I don't need to find my track thing. There we go. There he is. Sidney Coe Howard was still a student at Berkeley when he wrote a play called The Cranbrook Masque. And the reason for that play was to celebrate and dedicate a new outdoor theater on George Booth's Cranbrook estate in Michigan. Today, Cranbrook is a very famous school of art. He decided, and Sidney Coe Howard went on. He went to Harvard to become a lawyer and dropped out real quick and went right back into drama. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for drama in 1925 and a posthumous Academy Award for the screenplay for Gone with the Wind. Okay. So what you're seeing here is the Greek theater that was being dedicated and the costume actors, and I'm going to tell you what that play was about very briefly. This is Samuel Hume, looking not nearly as august as he did when he was in his 60s, in the role of tragic actor, who introduces the play. And the play is actually an allegorical story of the search for love, song, romance, and beauty through all the ages. And those ages included Greek, medieval, Renaissance, and two more that I can't remember off the top of my head. So here you see them again. The Irving Pischel, who had been here for La Primavera and was going to come back for The Quest, is right here. He is in Harlequin outfit. He participated in it. And this is Sam Hume. And these are some of the principals of that production. They're sitting on the steps of the Greek theater. And then this next one shows you that these were young people having a really good time because they camped out on George Booth's estate for weeks. They practiced all day and all night, and they swam in the pool, and they had a jolly old time. Okay. The Quest in Santa Barbara, however, was not going to be in that kind of a Greek theater. It was going to be in a theater built in what's today Plaza Del Mar. And I wanted to show you this picture because it's that Plaza Del Mar. This is Pershing Park, Plaza Del Mar. It's where the baseball fields are. It's where the bandstand is. Back in the late 1880s. Okay, this all started to change in 1892 when they built Plaza Del Mar and a bathhouse. So up here is the Dibley Estate and became the Ledbetter Estate, hence Ledbetter Beach, and today is City College. And here you can follow this along. There's a road. Well, by 1920, that road had changed a little bit. It came down this way, then it came this way, and it came back down this way. And this had been mostly drained, but there was still, I mean, if you're building on an estero, there's water. And so that water was sort of sluey and gucky and awful, and reeds were growing through it. And what they decided to do is, since they wanted to put the stage right here, okay, that they were going to drain what was left of the slough, which was much less than what you're seeing here, and fill it with seawater, make it a lagoon, and the actors could come to the stage in ships. So it must have been incredible because there's the Italian scene. Here comes the gondola, and they're coming down the lagoon, and then they climb up on the stage. It must have been absolutely incredible. And on the road that was going to be here were huge processions of hundreds of costume actors. There was song, there was dance, there was horses, there were fairies dancing and tree lights. It was incredible. Okay, so go this way, Hattie. So just to look at it again, this is the Sanborn map from 1907. Again, this is the Edison plant. This was the bathhouse. This is the Plaza Del Mar. This is where the dot is right now is about where the bandstand is, and this is where they built the stage. And as you can see, it says, to dedicate Santa Barbara's outdoor theater. That was their big plan. They were going to make an outdoor theater. Today, very difficult to imagine what that all must have looked like, because this is what's left of the slough, and this is the road, and you can actually still walk up that. My husband and I just discovered that last year when I was doing the research for this, and it's a wonderful road, takes to a great little overlook right by City College, and if you get behind the tennis courts, which is what this picture is, I believe that the stage was built right here. Now, I haven't found any photos of the production, but Mary Morris, who played the lead role, a female role in the production, described the play in an article in November 1920. And so she says so try to imagine what this must have opened with. The audience sat on the far side of the lagoon, she said, 1,000 or more people gazing up at what mystery of the hillside would unfold. Suddenly, a spot of light was thrown on the vast figure of the tragic actor, standing alone some 12 feet high and clad in brilliant scarlet with a vivid blue mask. He spoke, then vanished with a clash of cymbals. The morning press called it the prettiest play that Santa Barbara had ever seen, but the many empty seats caused the Community Arts Organization to cancel plans for an outdoor theater. But they didn't give up. They decided they would produce community drama. They would do so without the expensive consultants from out of town. They decided a smaller format with one-act plays might be the way to get started, give a lot of people opportunity to participate both on stage and backstage, to create sets, design and sew costumes, make advertising posters, etc. And these are the very first 3 one-act plays that they produced. They were fabulously successful. And so they decided to become permanent. Some of the principals involved with the Community Arts Association at this time were Adele Herder. Adele Herder brought the Community Arts Orchestra into the organization. Albert Herder, her husband and artist, they were both really famous artists. Albert Herder's paintings hang in our public library. He was a muralist. He taught at the School of the Arts. He put on extravaganzas for the Community Arts Organization as fundraisers, and both he and she were part of the Christmas pageant that Pearl Chase. It's a young Pearl Chase. You're used to seeing photos of her much older than that, I suspect. But this is Pearl Chase right about that time. She was a young woman, and she started the Christmas pageants and the Tree of Lights. Albert and Adele were the first ones to deal with to create the Tree of Lights. And this man, we have very few pictures of him as well. This is Bernard Hoffman, who was incredibly important. He became the executive director of the Community Arts organization overall, and this is his wife Irene. Their main focus was to preserve the old adobes and to come up with a unified architectural style for Santa Barbara in the Spanish style. And Pearl Chase and he also were into landscape beautification. So they created quite, we owe them a lot of what we have today. This is Georges Clairbois leading the Community String Orchestra. that had joined the community arts organization. Adele Herder designed the purple robes. Too bad it's not in color, huh? And the blue, called Herder blue, curtains in the background were made by Herder looms. And that's Georges Clairbois. He later changed his name to Roger. Don't ask why. I don't know. Okay. This group incorporated in 1923 and with this symbolic logo. For instance, this was St. Cecilia's crown, and she was the patron saint of music. This was St. Barbara's castle, the patron saint of architecture, and so on. They didn't worry about calling things after saints in those days. Anyways, so here the Community Arts Organization is complete. At this point in time, I think this is about 1923, it has 1,100 members and is looking for more. And soon, as the plays continued, and they were being played at the Potter Theatre. I don't know if any of you know where the Potter Theatre was. It was on the corner of Montecito Street and State Street. And it wasn't owned by Potter. It was owned by Lago Marcino. Okay. Anyway, so they finally decided, because the players are the ones that started the whole thing, that they wanted to go with a full-length production. So they chose The Lame Duck by none other than Victor Mapes, our sometime local resident playwright. And you might recognize some of the names in here of the cast of characters. Okay. Mary Smith, that's George Washington Smith's wife. And she was very active with the players. And they tried to recruit people to come and work and be participating, and gave them little sheets like this where they could sign up, and they did. There were hundreds and hundreds of people involved in making these productions. Their next play was going to be The Country Cousin, but Edna Schmidt died suddenly of a burst appendix, and so the play was postponed. Well, the Herders knew that the show must go on, and they recruited a woman that they knew of named Nina Moyes, who was working in Los Angeles at the time. She was a graduate of Stanford University and an aspiring actress, and she had worked with both the Washington Street Players and with the Providence Town Players in New York City, which were both experimental little theaters. Apparently, she used to come to watch their rehearsals, which weren't very good, apparently. You know, this is Eugene O'Neill we're talking about here, Susan Glaspell and that crew. And she just watched, and one day she was sort of moved to interrupt and said, "Don't you think if you cross so instead of so, it would be better?" And they tried it, and it was. Now, the Provincetown Players had this idea that, well, you didn't need a director, right? You have the playwright, you have the actors, you work it out, because those are the people that are the principals. Well, they weren't having much success with that school of thought. So they hired Nina, and she basically saved their bacon. Nina then came to Santa Barbara, and she produced The Country Cousin by Booth Tarkington, and she stayed on for 5 more years. Here are some of the plays, just a few of the probably, 50 plays that she produced during that particular time. The community arts players became so successful under her leadership that people were inspired to say, okay, let's try this again. Let's have a community theater. And so what happened was they bought the old Lobero Theatre. The Potter had basically wiped out was such competition, it wiped out the Lobero. The Lobero Theatre was aging, it was falling down, it was unsafe. And 4 men stepped up, bought it from the Hollister family, and formed a holding company, and said, okay, and then they recruited other holders and said, okay, sell stock so that it will truly be a community theater. and they would be paid back. The old Lobero Theatre then had always been a community theater. When it opened in 1873, it opened with a chorus and soloists trained by Jose Lobero, and it opened with a band and an orchestra trained by Jose Lobero. Even though over the years many different groups would play on its stage from out of town, essentially it was always there for the community to use. And this shows you I can't really date it very well. I'm guessing it's around 1914 at the latest. And it's one of the last uses of the Lobero Theatre by the public at this time. And it's a school group, and there's been a pageant. And don't look too close because it's completely politically incorrect. What they did, they tried to rescue. Everybody loved the Lobero. They tried to rescue the old Lobero. And it just wasn't possible. So the holders came back to the stockholders and said, hey, will you spend more money? Can we spend more money and just, make a brand new theater in the Spanish style? So George Washington Smith, who had started out as restoring it, then became, and he and Luda Maria Riggs designed the new theater. Well, it's a new theater. It was going to be finished in August, and it needed a play to dedicate it. And despite attempts to find a play with a Spanish theme that would dedicate it, they just couldn't find one. So they called on their own old friend named Winthrop Ames. And Winthrop Ames was a producer in New York, and he had a play right then on Broadway. It was called Beggar on Horseback. It was doing really well. And he offered to let Santa Barbara use that play for a minimal amount of money for their opening for the Lobero Theatre. So Nina Moyes left at the end of the season. She raced to New York. She spent, a couple of months there studying the play, all the stagecraft, everything else, and poached one of their players who had been on the stage with her in Santa Barbara named Hamilton McFadden. And they came back to Santa Barbara. So Hamilton McFadden, there he is. That's Hamilton McFadden, back in the day. McFadden called together the businessmen of the community, and he said, look, we really need a festival to celebrate this opening, not just a play. What do you guys think? Do you think we could do that? And I've already talked to all the train railways, and they've agreed to lower the rates to bring people into Santa Barbara. And I've talked to the hotels, and they're lowering their rates to bring people into Santa Barbara. And the businessmen thought, yeah, maybe this might be the annual event that we're looking for. And sure enough, it is, and it was. So Old Spanish Days, August 13 through 16, 1924, they're approaching 100 years today. This picture shows both events. The man on the right is dressed in rags. He is the beggar on horseback, and he's carrying the banner, the poster for that. And the man on the left is a caballero, and he's carrying the poster for La Fiesta. Beggar on Horseback was incredibly difficult. It had incredibly difficult stagecraft. It was a comedy written by George Kaufman and Mark Connolly. It was a satirical comedy, satirized lots of things of American life. The word widget comes from this because the Mr. Cady owned the widget factory in town. So these incredibly difficult things required a technical advisor, and they brought a man who was, at that time, had become a star of the silver screen, David Imboden, to town. And special effects like a flying judge's bench, and they had 18 scene changes, and the curtain only fell once. It required weeks of training. We don't have any photographs of the Beggar on Horseback being played on the new Lobero stage. Not that I have found. They may be out there. But we do have, thanks to Mark Appleton, photographs of a piece of that play called the pantomime, because this woman right here is Angelica Bryce, Mark Appleton, our local architect's grandmother. And she played the role of the Princess of Xanadu. The Princess of These are actors from The Beggar on Horseback. Some of them were in the pantomime, and others, like this man you see here, was playing Mr. Cady, and you see him in his judge's robes. They were in the Fiesta Parade in a flower-bedecked car. It's really quite lovely. Okay. So let's go back to Albert Herder. Okay, Albert Herder loved to get dressed up in costumes. I think that's why he put on all these extravaganzas. He had put 4 extravaganzas together, staffed by people from the community. Everybody had a role. And this one is the Dionysus scene, and he brought it to Santa Barbara and staged it here. This one is actually from 1909, and that, of course, is Albert and his society lady friends. Okay, and his very last gift to Santa Barbara, as far as his drama goes, was a play that he wrote called The Gift of Eternal Life. And it was his last gift to the Community Arts Association drama branch. And what you see here is Albert, he played the king, of course. And this is Ruth St. Denis. Some of you may know that name. She was a very famous dancer in her day. And she played the courtesan. And David Imboden, who had been the technical advisor on Beggar on Horseback, is her lover. So it was quite the deal. Over 300 people were involved in a true community event. In fact, Luda Maria Riggs was in this play. She played the little slave girl. Okay. A great number of the players went on to lifelong careers in entertainment. Walter Houston, who you see here on the left, was a former vaudeville star, and he had been encouraged by his sister, Margaret Carrington, on your right, who had been a concert singer on the concert stage in England, to come to Santa Barbara and, it'd be fun, you can take some roles in the Community Arts Players. Well, between Nina Moyes' coaching and her coaching, he became such an accomplished actor that he went to Hollywood and he acted on the legitimate stage and then became a movie star, he was nominated for an Oscar 4 times. He won for The Treasure of Sierra Madre, Best Supporting Actor, and his son John won the Best Director Award for that same movie. So. Another was Ian Wolfe. Ian Wolfe had played the Prince of Xanadu in the pantomime scene. He'd also played in lots of other players' movies. And here you see him. He went to Hollywood. He became a very famous character actor. And here you see him in a Star Trek episode. Now, one of the things about Nina Moyes was that she was known for finding the right person for the right part. And for the role of Mrs. Cady in Beggar on Horseback, she had approached a woman named Gertrude W. Hoffman, who demurred, saying, she didn't know how to act. She'd never acted. To which Nina Moyes said, "Oh, nonsense. You've been acting all your life." So now, Gertrude was married to Ralph Hoffman. Ralph Hoffman was Bernard Hoffman's brother, and Ralph Hoffman was the director of the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. He died in 1932, and in 1933, Gertrude gave up the role of grieving widow and went to Hollywood and became a very well-known character actress. Here you see her with Boris Karloff in The Ape, which I believe was an Alfred Hitchcock production. And the rest of these are as the beloved Mrs. Odetts. the neighbor to My Little Margie. Does anybody besides me remember My Little Margie? Okay, I used to watch that all the time. And that was, the actress was Gail Storm. Okay. Okay, so the other person was Hamilton McFadden himself. He was 23 when he became the executive director. He only did it to get Beggar on Horseback and everything launched, and then he went back to his career. But he basically became a very well-known director. He directed hundreds of movies, such as Stand Up and Cheer, which was a breakthrough role for Shirley Temple, the early Charlie Chan movies, and dozens of other movies as well. Nina Moyes. Nina Moyes left in 1925 and resumed her acting career. She said she never wanted to be a director. She wanted to be an actress. So she tried in different repertory companies back east, and then eventually came back to California and Los Angeles, where she worked as a voice coach as well as an assistant director. And then in 1933, for Cradle Songs, she became the first woman director of a talking motion picture. So that was our Nina Moyes. Okay. The legacy lives on. The Lobero Theatre is approaching 100 years. CAMA has already celebrated its 100 years. Old Spanish Days Fiesta. And the flag came from La Primavera. Those colors, the Santa Barbara colors and the Santa Barbara flag, were created during the time of La Primavera. So we have a wonderful legacy, and thank you so much for listening to me go on and on about it, because I love it. Do you have... Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What drew me to the topic was, well, first, I'll tell you, CAMA did, because CAMA hired me to write celebrating CAMA Centennial. And they wanted me to focus on the music, which I did, but I didn't want to. So when that was all over, I said, there are all these things out there that I want to know about. I want to investigate some of these other lines. The next line of community arts organization I want to actually pursue, if I get myself together, is the plants and planting, because that hasn't been written about either. But thank you for the question. Anybody else?
Yeah. Rochester came up a few times. How did that fit in? How did they connect with us back?
Well, through me. Okay. Rochester, Arthur Farwell, and Harry Barnhart were in Rochester. That's where the community chorus idea was founded. So I went looking for community chorus photographs. I couldn't find them here in Santa Barbara. So I thought, well, I'll try Rochester. And so their archive has a really good online list of what they have in the collection. And so then I kept seeing Santa Barbara. I said, let's go. So I didn't go there. I called them. And again, they were so sweet. They were so nice. That, yes, of course you can use this. And I don't know if you noticed that I have to give credit to this very long line of citation. But they are letting us use those photographs for the noticias, and I'm assuming for this. Yeah. So that's the Rochester. That's where the photographs are. We don't have them. Okay.
How did all the groups survive the Depression?
Not well. No, with CAMA, it was in 1939 that the two last organizations separated and incorporated separately. CAMA incorporated separately in 1939. There was a transition period. By 1940 or 41, it was a separate organization. And Plants and Planting continued for a while after that. But again, I haven't looked into that one, so I don't know when they quit. I think by 1938, the players were done. Outside of the community arts organization, there at the Lobero, there is a list being compiled by Brett Hodges of every single play that was ever done at the Lobero. He's producing that. I only have the ones that were produced. It's in the appendix to the noticias. I only have the ones because that's what I was focusing on, was the community arts players that were produced by them at the Lobero and at the Potter. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, Daisha.
Thank you, Hattie.
You're welcome.